Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and it's on internet banking, and we have our world famous speaker Professor Rob, Professor Donald, Professor David and Mr. James Eid. And it will be very interesting. I'm sure that with their knowledge already we are getting very good news from the market, especially from South Asia, from Asia Pacific, from Europe. Many companies, many governments, they start to show their interest, how they can work with us, how especially they're getting service from our speakers. And I'm sure our speakers also happy to engage with different corporations uh, around the Asia Pacific ecosystem. And if you have, I'm sure if you have some sort of your organizational problem and other things, you directly even can communicate with Professor Rob, Professor Davids, and Professor Donalds and Mr. James It. And beside that, World Talent Economy Forum, we are developing our board of advisors and our main team. So from there, you can get all of our support and everything. So I want to start from Professor Rob. Today we will discuss on internet banking. In developing nations, internet banking actually already started and it's playing a very good role right now. What is your observation? What is the benefits and pros and cons you want to analyze for today? Yes.
Well, internet banking allows a financial institution to reach a much larger audience than they would if it was localized. I mean, going back to the way the banks were, you had to have proximity. People had to come into the bank to get their money. They had to come into the bank to do their transactions. That's not the case anymore. With internet banking, much of this stuff can be done remotely. A banking institution, a financial institution can handle the needs of a nation. In some cases, they can handle the needs of people outside of their own country, depending on their breadth and the regulations involved. The key thing here, though, is what often governs this, or at least constrains it, are the regulations in the country where the internet bank is operating. The issues with internet banking really come down mostly to fraud and scale. You have to be able to scale up to the audience that you're trying to address, because people have a very low tolerance for banks that can't give them the money when they need it or give them access to people when they want it. And so being able to scale and moving to automated ways of interacting with clients that don't drive them away from you becomes very important early on, because the chance you're going to get a wave of customers that want to contact you at once is far higher when you're dealing with a much larger customer pool. The other thing you have to watch really closely, of course, is the underlying issue with regard to fraud, which is still pretty rampant in the banking industry, and which has made blockchain as a technology which came out underneath cryptocurrency very attractive, because it's one of the most effective ways of dealing with fraud. It's not like you can't do fraud under blockchain. It's just far harder and requires a much higher level of technical competency to pull it off. And so it knocks out, say, about 85% of the people that would otherwise be committing the crime, and makes them incapable of doing so. So it reduces your instance quite a bit. And the other thing, of course, is moving as aggressively as you can away from passwords and IDs, which are inherently unsecure, and at least implementing a dual factor authentication method that backs up the ID and password so that people aren't getting access to each other's accounts. So it's a very technology rich area to go into. The technology allows these companies to scale and allows these companies to protect the transaction actions and protect the people that are doing them. So that's really where internet banking lives. It's a much more technical enterprise than our traditional banks have been.
Thank you. Professor Donald, how do you want to analyze today's topic, and how especially developing nations get benefit from internet banking?
Well, internet banking, what do banks do? If you put your money in a bank and you want to get money out of a bank, what do you want? Why are you doing that? And one answer is it's hopefully safer than putting it under a mattress. So I support what Rob is saying about the whole issue of security, because if it isn't safer than putting it under a mattress, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? The other aspect of banks is that they loan money to people. So what they do is they take the money that you deposit and then they loan it to people. They collect interest on that money, and then they take a portion of that interest and pay you for the value of using your money. So that's just the simple structure of what banks do. And they've been around certainly since the Medici at the beginning of the Renaissance. And so what goes on? What's the big difference between regular banking and internet banking? Well, regular banking in much of the world is a very consolidated industry. There aren't very many banks, and those banks hold a huge amount of resources, and because of that, they're very politically powerful. So they can manipulate the regulations. They can manipulate the laws that govern them, and to protect themselves, to protect their what you call in economics rents, because they have a lock on getting that interest and making that money. And you've seen that bankers often get obscene salaries. I mean, we're talking, $10 million a month kind of salaries, just outrageous. And they do it because they can. And internet banking is kind of doing an end run around that. And it's getting so common that every time I log into Credit Karma, it offers me a Credit Karma bank account. And there's PayPal bank accounts. And there's bank accounts that you can get from multiple sources now. And so I think that the most interesting thing about internet banking is that it manages to cut those fees and undercut those fees so that it allows for real competition, because the general banking industry is just not competitive. They get to charge whatever they want. And internet banking is allowing us to have multiple banks that can compete with each other. And sure, when it comes to security, Rob is the complete guru on that, and we'll be talking about that more. And David, me too, but I'm not going to talk about it right now. So I'm going to let everybody go, and I'm just going to say that about banks right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Well, thank you, Sharif. The banking industry is one, as Rob queued up for us, one with a lot of technology beginning to emerge now. As he said, many years it really was a person-to-person industry where your relationship was with the individuals and the bank provided the services through the individual. That has really changed. But what's interesting to me is the size of the banking industry also. In 2019, the banking industry was $129 trillion as their portion that they were dealing with in the formal banks, excluding the national banks. That's a lot of money in the banks that are outside of the national banks. And so it's a marketplace where the risks are high. Donald talked about security there. There's the old saying, criminals always go where the money is. And with money that size, the security requirements are really high. And in the past, on the digital banking, they tended to use air-gap networks, where the networks were separate networks and were not part of the public internet. Well, that's changed with the trends that Rob has talked about, with the pushing to more mobile services and the elements there. Putting on my futurist hat, there's tons of new trends that you see in this industry. But one of the biggest new trends is the banks are adopting banking as a service platform to really change it. And that has led to the concept of open banking and some huge changes around that. The places the banks got into the digital world early, though, is through IVR systems and voice recognition systems. And you're seeing that being enhanced now with us using Alexa and Siri and others. You're seeing increasing movement in banks to voice payments and mobile banking, which I think is a very, very interesting trend as we see this going. The corporations are not being neglected in the big trends in banking as well, because most corporations have began to move away from paper checks, and they want people to submit their money back to them digitally. Particularly in developing nations, I see the use of enhanced voice, the use of the mobile digital check on the smartphones, and the fact that there's the big movement in the way we pay our bills is being a trend that's going to be particularly beneficial for developing nations. Um, there are so many trends going on in this area. Big data, AI, machine learning is not lost in the banking industry going there. Uh, the other thing that's kind of really interesting is we see a reverse trend as part of this. We see big tech providing solutions to the banking industry, but big tech is increasingly wanting to become a bank themselves. And we're seeing that, you see big box stores like Walmart entering into the banking industry because the digitalization of the banking industry makes it easy for them to do that. You see consolidations. One of the companies in Austin, Casera, actually provides the entire digital infrastructure for small community banks and credit unions. And so they're providing basically all the online functions, all the digital functions for these smaller banks. So they're offering banking as a service to banks who then can offer banking as a service to their customers. So it's a very, very interesting market dynamic really going in place there. Um, the other thing that's really very, very different, and I can talk about a lot of the other trends, the digital ledgers, the IoT, others on there. But the other trend that I think is really interesting when you talk about banking, let me move this from traditional David to my bank. Let me move it beyond my company to my bank. But let's move it now into investments and investment banking. Uh, with robo services, being able to manage my account using AI and things, we have taken in many instances the person to the stockbroker equation out of even investment banking as we've moved more of the AI, more of the machine learning, more of the ability for individuals to write decision points in AI, even to the investment banking side. And that has really changed that side of the industry as well. So I could keep going with trends, but I think that's a really good quick overview.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Jamesid, how do you want to analyze today's topic, internet banking? What do you want to share with our audience?
Thank you, Sharif, for having me on. This is another really interesting topic. And I'd like to say with internet banking, what is the problem they're trying to solve? And with those solutions that we come up with cause new problems, novel problems. And can we anticipate some of them? Some of them will be unanticipated consequences, but some of them we can anticipate. What will that look like? And so I also wanted to say, what was the past? What did we get here? What are the problems we're trying to solve? And Donald brought up the Medicis, and this is a good place to start because in the early Renaissance period, the Catholic Church was very dominant, and lending money was a sin. It was called usury, and so they would allow the Jews to do it. And so the Jews became the people that would lend money, and they became wealthy, and people couldn't pay back their loans. What they had was the Russian word is pogrom, and it was an act of violence and creating havoc and taking the materials back and driving the Jews away. And this happened over and over and over again, and it led to this great anti-Semitism that we've seen over and over again throughout history. So this is the early kind of how am I going to lend you money, and how it didn't work. There were problems that were built into the system. And so then we had this more stable banking industry where you could go to a bank and pick it up, and people would rob the banks. And, we had that kind of history. And now the banking is more secure in terms of going to the bank and putting your card into an ATM and getting your cash out. This is more secure, but now we're talking about internet banking. What is the problem we're trying to solve? Well, when I send a check or I send a, it takes a while before the person gets the money. And why is that? Donald gave us a little explanation about this, and because they want to batch them up and send them all at once to be batch processed and distributed there. So there's a built-in delay into this system. So what is this internet banking causing? It's causing a lack of delay. They're having the security, the efficiency is going way up. Now, these are the types of problems that we're trying to solve, but then, we have brand new security issues, which Rob mentioned. And we have different things that are potentially, more secure, but potentially the new ways they're still unsecure are going to be very new. And have we anticipated them? I think maybe we have, and maybe we haven't. So these are the things that I want to talk about. And yeah, getting rid of the fees, making it more economical, more efficient. This is the direction that we're going in. But we also are trying to get rid of the idea of boundaries between us. And I'll tell you what I mean by the boundaries. Right? My foundation sends chess equipment to places that can't afford them. And this is all around the world. Now, if I did it from the United States to a country, say in Africa, the cost is prohibitive. But I have a Chinese manufacturer who in the shipping to Africa is much cheaper. So they produce the goods cheaper, they ship them cheaper, it's more sustainable for my company. So I do that. Now, my bank doesn't want to talk to their bank. It's funny, and maybe I don't have enough clout or something like that. Maybe I don't have enough smarts or something like that, but I have to pay them through Western Union. I didn't even know Western Union still existed. And sometimes when I send this equipment to an African country, all of a sudden there's taxes that they have to pay. And of course, they can't afford chess equipment. They can't afford to pay the taxes. So how do I get money to them? Well, there's an application called SendWave. And that, 3 out of the 5 countries that I'm in Africa use SendWave. So I can send the money just by my phone. It's simple. It's so easy, and it's painless. And so then they can pay the taxes and get the product that has been shipped there and is there in their city, in their village or whatever, it's there, but they won't release it unless they cough up some dough. So, okay, but what about the 2 that don't take SendWave? So all of a sudden I have all these different problems that I did not anticipate. Did not anticipate using Western Union. I did not anticipate having to need SendWave. Thank goodness that SendWave exists. I did not anticipate that there would be duties and taxes. And who is that going to? Is it going to the government? Is it going to the person that's taking the money and putting it in his pocket? I don't know. I have no control over these things. So these are the things that the new world of internet banking is hoping to solve, and we have to think about what are the unintended consequences, what are the new problems that we're going to have to solve. Because believe me, we have every time we have a solution, we have another problem, and but every time we have a problem, a solution is trailing right behind it. So I'm overall very optimistic. I love the trend. Thanks, Sharif.
Thank you. Before I go to Professor Rob, I just want to share one statistics, but statistic shows internet banking actually increasing. It's growing very fast. I think Asia Pacific is one of the place where actually internet banking is growing. Even Africa, South Asia, USA also internet banking is increasing. It's just statistics from 2020 to 2024. In 2020, we are observing from this data, this blue one actually from Far East and China. Then deep blue is USA, North America. Then these things is for Europe, then Latin America and rest of the world. In 2020, there is a 1,903.2 millions active user for internet banking. It's increasing in 2022, 2,043 millions. And accordingly to this statistics, 2022 to 2023 and 2024, it will be growing. I think for COVID-19 situations, government has to like take they have to give more opportunity for internet banking, and in 2024 it will be 2,551.8 million people they will use it. And there is a big amount of people actually from Asia Pacific, even I think this Alipay, Alibaba, and many, even in Malaysia, Singapore, many countries, they heavily want to introduce this internet banking. But this is good trend or bad trend. We have our expert panelists, they can analyze these things. Professor Rob, what is your analysis? What will happen? We are observing from data until 2024 this internet banking will be increased, but what is the pros and cons? Is it actually really applicable? Is it good? But from the developing nations, I observe always that banking system has lot of error. I think one show we discussed that Bangladesh has a lot of hackings and many things happens. Even in traditional banking systems, many actually there are many defaulters and many people cannot pay the loan properly. What is your analysis? How we can protect this system?
Well, we've got the technology to do it. The question, of course, technology costs money, and in an emerging economy, sometimes that's the thing that's in short supply. Also, with regard to banking, different cultures support the activity very differently, and the regulatory environment's very different country to country. So it really takes the beginning of the journey is really understanding the banking environment in the country you're trying to operate in, understanding the regulatory requirements, which are often very steep with regard to managing people's money, and then making sure that the audience you're trying to address will cover the entire gamut of what you need for banking. Because to make a bank work, you do have to be able to loan money, and those loans have to be paid back, because that's really what generates an awful lot of the revenue that keeps the banks running, as Donald pointed out. And in some countries that just doesn't work all that well. I just say culturally it doesn't work well. David brought up IVRs. I just wanted to point out, whenever I hear an acronym, I want to point out what the acronym means, which is interactive voice response. Internet banking is probably going to hinge on the future of that technology, though now we call it natural language processing. It's advanced quite a bit, and we're moving to conversational computing. So that means you can talk to computers and you're going to think it's a person. One of the trials I was involved with a couple years back, it was kind of funny, and it was a banking trial with regard to loans, they had a recording of a guy that was trying to ask the conversational computer out because he thought it was a real person, pretty much shamelessly flirting with the computer, believing it was a woman. Which the computer didn't care. It's hard to commit misogyny against a computer. Though I'm sure somebody will figure it out. The other thing that's kind of happening in these emerging markets are crowdfunding and microloans. These things are taking off like wildfire, because the nature of emerging economies is often they don't have the money that they need to emerge. You've got to be able to have a culture that allows you to borrow money if you want to grow rapidly and expand. And if you don't, then you're just going to expand much more slowly. And a lot of the emerging economies just don't really have the banking thing worked out. And so individuals can't get the money they need to build a business and then build, and therefore that creates a drag on building the country from a third world country into a first world. So the banking is pretty critical in the space, and getting the government on board to making sure those funds are available. And often it's not, strangely enough, you pointed out people paying back the loans is a problem. Strange enough, it's not as bad as you think, as long as you're choosing people that have a good history of doing what it is they're going to say. You can't be cavalier, and there are criminals that move through and game the system, and you have to protect against that. But not everybody is a criminal. That typical measurement said less than 10% of the folks are probably going to do something bad, and about 10-20% of the folks, no matter what you do, are going to do something good. And as long as you kind of focus on the good guys and find and identify and lock out the bad ones, you can do an awful lot of good work here. And that's a computing exercise. It's where you're doing analysis on databases. in theory, depending on the regulatory environment in an emerging economy, banks should probably be sharing data on customers so that they, at least with regard to customers that are attempting to defraud them, so that they can protect each other from banking failure. With any emerging industry, it's really about cooperation and collaboration in the early days. If you get too much into competition and restriction, particularly when it's a data intensive effort, whether that be medical or banking, both are very data intensive, and you're unwilling or unable to share, then you're going to have more problems growing the underlying effort. But the other technology to watch is something called ambient computing, which is what's coming forward now, which is the idea that wherever you are, you've got a computer that you can talk to, and that computer will talk back to you. And that's probably the way we're going to do banking and much of the rest of our computing activities in the future. And one of the advantages of emerging economy is sometimes they can jump ahead of an emerged economy, because the emerged economy's already put stuff in place, and so they've got to displace existing technology. Where an emerging economy, they haven't put anything in place, and they can move to the next generation technology much more quickly than a developed country, because they don't have something to displace first. People don't like change anyway, and it's much easier to implement something that's fresh than implement something that forces people to do something very differently than they have been doing before. So there are some opportunities here and some wonderful technologies that can help folks to do it, but you would have to make sure that you have expertise in the regulatory environment, a full understanding of your customer base, and of course, clearly, if you're going to implement technology, develop the core skill set, so at least you understand the basics of the technology you're implementing, so the stuff works together. One piece of advice: never use the best of class approach to a complex technology. You want an integrated solution and somebody that owns it. If you try to implement it components and integrate it yourself, it's going to end very badly, regardless of how good the components are. So a couple things a couple practical pieces of advice, and that covers it for me now.
Thank you, Professor Rob. There are a lot of problems in developing nations, even in Asia Pacific. So we are trying to solve many problems with the collaboration of world-leading experts like Professor Rob, Professor Donald, Professor Davids, Mr. James Ed. We will declare our board of advisors today, those who will actively engage with World Talent Economy Forums, and I believe that any corporations, if it's a big corporation or small medium corporations, as well as the government related consulting, I am sure that they will support World Talent Economy Forum initiative, and especially we are making relations with the government, corporation, as well as academia. So any organization has any kind of issues, I'm sure they're gonna support you as a consultant. So Professor Rob, Professor Donald, Professor David, and Mr. James, it already I share our board of advisor name. So like after this round, you will declare the board of advisors and our team member name. So this way, I think Professor Rob can declare first 8, then Mr. Donald can declare second 8, then Professor David, then rest of the things, and Mr. James Ed, you will lead our core team, because we need a very professional team to handle government, corporation, as well as academia. I just want to give you some good news, like world largest forum from Asia Pacific, like Pacific Rim Business Council, like Global Chamber of Commerce, different countries, top government official, even Malaysian Prime Minister office, some like a board of like very influential people. We already sit with them. They are really interested about World Talent Economy Forum, and this is the achievement of our speakers. Because I can remember the first day I knocked Professor Rob, said, okay, can we do some sort of discussion? Until that day to last 1 year, 12, like 14 months, everybody supporting Professor Donald's, Professor David, James Ed. We have 300 different speakers from around the world. From there, 25 people we are just introducing with our audience, and they will help the ecosystem. They will help the government, they will help the corporations, and they will give the even university. So it by this way, I think we can solve many problems. And they are highly qualified, highly professional. They have a very big like background. So hopefully their knowledge will be very helpful for the Asia Pacific people. But good news is that not only Asia Pacific and South Asia or Middle East, even from Africa, from Europe, and many organizations, they say that they have many challenges and problem. Our speaker can solve these things. So this is the dedication from World Talent Economy Forum. We want to build up one of the best media as well as best consulting forum. So this is the way we actually help each other. Professor Donalds, how do you want to analyze this internet banking, its increasing, or if you have any kind of alternatives in your mind? Unmute, please.
Yeah, I was really listening to what everybody else has said. It's very interesting. I want to keep talking about the underlying aspect of internet banking. When Walmart tried to get into banking, they immediately ran into the barriers of the banks not wanting to allow it. And it actually took them a couple of years to figure out how to get around that so that they could do it. And as I said before, that's a fabulous thing because Walmart has been very good at lowering prices and being efficient in their distribution systems. And they also have an incredible IT structure. They have a town, Benson, Arkansas, that's pretty much all IT experts that work on programming for Walmart. That's it's the light of Arkansas. I mean, the rest of Arkansas is a pit, but I know I live there. One of the things that I mentioned last time, and I want to mention again, is that the reason that they do this batch processing, the automated clearinghouse, is that, for one thing, clearinghouses act kind of as escrow accounts, so that the people put the money in the escrow account so that they make sure it's there, so then it gets transferred to the next thing. The banking industry was one of the first industries to get into computers. And so every bank developed their own system completely independently of each other. There was no central, there weren't open APIs and open data structures and things like that for exchange of information. And they did it so long ago that they were using punch cards. And that is the reason that they do the batch processing. So it's, as several people said, it's a great time to leapfrog that. And I want to bring up something else about regulation. I had a friend who, Indian guy, he went to IIT, which is kind of considered to be the best technical university in India. And then he came here to Stanford and he was working on a PhD in statistics, and he wasn't making enough. He was just so tired of being broke, he quit and went into industry. And one of the jobs he had was working for a company that made predatory loans. And this is an interesting use of AI, because they had developed systems where they could identify people that were most likely to get these loans. And by predatory loans, what I mean is they're loans with extremely high interest rates. So one of them they call a payroll loan. So somebody that can't pay their utilities bill will borrow the amount that it takes to get their utilities bill with exorbitant interest, like 50% interest. And so they borrow $100, they have to pay back $160, which is really tough for somebody that's, really bouncing along the bottom. So what happens if these people can't pay their loans? What goes on there? Well, in the United States, we have a system where it's possible to declare bankruptcy. And what bankruptcy does is it allows you to basically erase the loans that you have and start over again. You're marked then. Rob mentioned the idea that you look for people who have good track records of paying back. And once you declare bankruptcy, you're marked as somebody who doesn't have a good track record. It makes it very difficult for you to borrow money in the future for a period of 10 years, and then that's erased from your credit report. So that's part of a regulatory structure that's important. We're starting to try and end predatory loans. Now, there's something I heard from being a child is that there's no debtor's prison in the United States. So basically, in some countries, if you don't pay your bills, you can actually go to jail. And there's a great English writer named Charles Dickens who has extensive stories of people who wound up in debtor's prison because they couldn't pay their bills. And the fact is, we actually do have debtor's prisons in the United States. And the way that it works is that the predatory loan people will take somebody to court, and then the court will say, okay, you've got to pay this amount, but they don't have the amount. And so since they don't have the amount, they're in contempt of court. And because they're in contempt of court, they get thrown in jail. And this has been an interesting problem. Going back to the internet banking aspect of it, there's very successful microloan banks all throughout the world. And microloan banks have an incredible record of paying back. The people who get microloans have basically fabulous credit ratings. Banks are intermediaries. They sit in the middle. In principle, just like you could trade a case of wine for a Apple Card or something like that, you could barter. Money allows intermediation so that you can basically trade goods that don't really map to each other one-on-one. Well, banks act as intermediaries as well, and they you can in principle find somebody and loan them money, but they basically aggregate all the people who want to borrow money with all the people who are giving money. And because of, as I said, regulation in the United States and lack of competition, the fees for this are exorbitant in the United States. And the internet banking is being fought tooth and nail by the big banks because they want to keep their rents. And the internet banking is starting to bypass them and allow people to be able to interact with each other far more directly. But there's danger in that because without the escrow accounts and without the underlying structure to make sure there's reserves, what reserves are is if a bank has a certain amount of money, they lend the money. If they lent all the money and somebody wanted to take their money out to buy a car or something like that, there wouldn't be any money there. So what they do is they keep a portion of the money in the bank. They don't loan it out, so it's available to people when they want to take their money out of the bank. So the whole system of reserves and needs to be administered at a higher level to make sure that people's money is actually protected. But there's a real disincentive to do that. I mean, to have the regulations for the banks because they could lend out more money and stuff like that. But it also makes it really difficult for somebody to enter into the industry. And the last thing I'm going to say right now is just very brief. Most banking robberies, most bank robberies are done with simple phishing. That's how they're done. There's no wonderful thing that they need blockchain, or some sort of sophisticated computer algorithms. It's just phishing. They send somebody, I frequently get emails that say, oh, there's a problem with your bank. You need to log in and correct the problem. And it's on very official Bank of America. And, it's got a login and password. And you look at the URL of who sent it to you, the email address, and it ends with .ru, which is Russia. It's not Bank of America. And that's basically how one of the way people rob banks. And I'll just end with a kind of funny, it was John Dillinger, who was a famous bank robber back in the 30s in the United States. And they asked him, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. And I'm just echoing what the others have said here. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David.
Good discussion as always. Donald, I've already started my AI bot to go after Bank of America now on your account. No, I'm kidding you. We're seeing so many different changes though, and what Donald just said is actually some of the things driving the changes we're seeing in internet banking and in banking in general. And one of the biggest trends you're going to see in internet banking and banking in general is we're beginning to move beyond just simple two-factor authentication. I can tell you on my mobile banking today, it's not just I go into my mobile account, I have two-factor authentication turned on. So it comes back and with different means, make sure it is me. But the biggest next trend you're going to see is enhanced biometric authentication. And that is going to help make it even more secure as you're going forward with banking. And the other trend we're beginning to see is a lot more AI being applied, not just in the physical banking side, but also in the customer relationship banking side. They're using AI to begin to know you digitally better than your person-to-person banker did. And we're seeing that same AI applied now more and more to security, because in internet banking, the reserve they have to keep to cover fraud and to cover the type of things that Donald were talking about and Rob were talking about earlier is actually very significant there. But one of the things I'd like to kind of go back and in with on this is COVID actually has changed internet banking and banking in dramatic ways as well. You know, one of the pushes I think that has helped accelerate internet banking is, at least around me, almost all of my traditional banks have closed their lobbies. And even today with lesson restrictions, which are now beginning to be clamped down on again, it's hard to go and visit a bank lobby. During the last 2 years, I can tell you, I've only been in a bank lobby once. And that's because I had to get stuff out of my safe deposit box. And it wasn't really traditional banking at all that drove me there. But the COVID has pushed the envelope to change to the no contact type of banking traditions. We know that credit cards begin to get the card in us, and then we could begin to use the card on readers where we didn't have to insert the card in the slot. We began to do that. But the other thing we have seen is we now have so many ways to do cardless totally approaches, where I can use near field communication, such as like with Apple Pay or Google Pay or some others, and have driven that. Yeah, I can tell you, I'm running more and more stuff through near field than I am with my traditional credit card there. The other big trend in that whole area, and this is really helps accelerate the acceptance of multinational internet banking, is through app generated codes. So what you can see now is I can generate a QR code and use that to make my payment in many places now too. So this whole contactless type of payment system is really a helpful and a driver for internet banking. I'm going to go back again and say the voice assisted things. And Rob, thank you for helping correct me. I should have explained what IVR is earlier, but it's becoming so much more. And because of that, enhancements in the voice technology, like Rob was talking about, one of the biggest trends you're going to see in banking and internet banking is the use of more chatbots. You already see chatbots there. If you go into many of the mobile banking sites, the little thing that pops up in the lower right-hand corner, that's not a person with a keyboard, that's a chat box, which will begin to take you through the things. But we're beginning to see them even more and more as in control of part of the process. Um, I mentioned before, we have built a 3D avatar that does conversational AI and machine learning and natural language processing to interact in real time with you in a conversational mode, not a pre-scripted answer mode. That is the next trend. Banking in particular is one of the largest early adopters of not just the elementary chat box, but they're pushing the envelope on the more advanced avatar-based chat boxes to do more. And this is going to lower the barrier for entries. You know, if you look at people who use mobile banking, the people over 60, about 15%. If I go to Generation Z, it's around 90%. And so that's kind of the curve of your universe. Well, the use of these chat box and the AI avatars and things is going to lower the barriers to make that more acceptable across the community. And those are some of the technology trends that are going to make internet banking in many ways almost the same as your local brick and mortar bank as well, with the exception of personal services. And I think that's a great trend for emerging nations. You see that the number of bank robberies, like Donald was talking about, has gone down tremendously during COVID because there just wasn't the resources there. And COVID pushed us to more of a digital banking experience. And this digital banking experience is what's driving, flattening the playing field around the world for basic banking, in particular with the Open Banking Initiative. Yes, you're going to still have the big ones, but it's becoming a much more level playing field with payment systems where banks can reconcile their transfer and things being accessible to extremely small banks right now. Final thing is, it was mentioned a couple of times with microloans. Microloans and crowdfunding is also another form of internet banking. I've done probably 20 microloans in one country in Africa. My default rate's low. In fact, of the 20, it's about 1. So you see that, but it's changing the way accessibility is to money and to loans and to commerce. And formal internet banking and informal internet banking like microloans and crowdfunding, I think, are the other things that you're going to see spread much more widely in developing nations. Even some of the big international funding organizations like IDB, World Bank, even USAID is beginning to get into more of a digital banking mode as well too. So a lot of changes, and I think in this instance, most of them are for the very good. So Sharif, thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. James Ed.
Yes, Sharif, thank you very much. And I agree with David. Big changes, and most of them are very, very good. But don't get complacent, because some of them aren't so good. So, you know, one of the things I wanted to bring up to people's attention is what Donald mentioned. The bankings have barriers to entry. The banks have barriers to entry, and they know that the confluence of this international banking and cryptocurrency threatens their way of existence. They are pretty fat, dumb, and happy right now. And this is, do we really need them? This is the kind of question we're really asking. Do they serve a purpose anymore? And the idea is that they might have something up their sleeve in response. And these are some of the unintended future circumstances that we're going to face, because we don't know exactly what the unanticipated, I would rather say, because we don't know how that's going to shake out. But as it's just eliminating fees, more efficient, instead of waiting for them to be batched up and deposited, and then very later on, my money gets where I intended it, it goes there immediately. You know, these are the types of things that we want. These are more efficient, better. Why wouldn't we do it? Well, there's a lot of reasons. There are barriers to this, and they're going to shake out in ways that we have not yet seen. So it's going to be interesting, but I think it's both basically for the best. But Donald also talked about predatory loans. Well, remember the predatory mortgages? This housing bubble that happened in this century. It was based on predatory mortgages. People had no way of being able to pay this stuff off, but they convinced them to take them out anyway. And they made money. They made lots of money off of this, and then it all crashed. So, this is what we want to think about before we get down that road again, where we're going down a road that looks good, looks smart, looks like everybody's making money and everybody's better off. And then there's a big bubble and a big crash. So we don't want to go down that road again. So the other thing that I want to talk about, if I wish I could read my writing, what we're talking about the two phases of identification and the voice recognition and all of these types of things we're talking about really is basically trust. Can I trust you to get the money to the person I trust deserves the money that I'm sending? And I do not recommend you do it the way I do it, but the way I do it is that, okay, I need this guy in China to manufacture these goods and to ship these goods for me. Well, I don't know this guy in China. So, how do I, well, I do some basic research. I do some, due diligence, and I check him out. And yeah, there are other people working with him, and yeah, he's got a pretty good track record. Okay, so I'll work with him. And then the first time I send money to him, he sends the goods. Second time I send money to him, he sends the goods. They get where I asked them to send it. Now I trust them. Now I don't worry about it. When I send an order to him, I know that it's going to be fulfilled and sent to where I've asked it to go to. So, but where am I sending it to? Sending it, say one of the places was Uganda. I don't know this guy in Uganda. This could be a ripoff. Now, why would you want chess equipment? I mean, to sell it? I don't know. The ripoff chances are probably pretty small. But, I want to do due diligence on him. So guess what? I know a guy in Uganda. I worked with him at the World Championships for juniors with chess juniors with disabilities. And he's a great guy. I know him. I trust him. He vouched for him. So due diligence, you do this. But this is a cumbersome way of doing it. What we have to do is like an automatic verification system. And that's what we're talking about with these voice recognition and these things that are getting more and more complex, but we're going to one day be trusted. Because this is not your grandparents' banking system anymore. And the handshake over the desk doesn't happen anymore. The handshakes are virtual now, and we're going to have to trust it. But it's changing. It's changing at a rapid rate. So lots of people aren't going to trust it. So we have to ask two questions. I always want to ask these questions, and I'm shy, Sharif, but I'm going to have to leave after this. But the two questions is, who's controlling it? Who's the people that say you're trustworthy or you're not trustworthy? You can be in the system or you're out of the system. Who is in control? And who has access? Does everyone have access? Does everyone have equal access? Or are we assuming that 10% of the population is going to have access and 90% are going to be have-nots? And is that acceptable? So how are we going to solve that problem too? It's not just the technology that we have to solve, it's the societal issues and the effects on society that it's going to have, so that everybody's playing the same game by the same rules. Thanks, Sharif. I have to say goodbye, but wonderful discussion. Glad to be a part of it. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Professor Rob, Professor Donalds, and Professor David, I share our board of advisor names with you in the Facebook. So in your messenger. So if you declare the board of advisor names and our full name, like last 1 year, actually 14 months, like many speaker joins from there based on dedications, hard works, professional attitudes. We just think how we can make a best team. And actually we are getting very good call from government, corporations, and academia. So hopefully your contributions will help us to grow our organization in an effective way. We just want to focus on like consulting and this kind of things. So Professor Rob, if you declare first 8 speakers' name. like board of advisor names for World Talent Economy Forum.
Yeah, thanks for putting me on the list. I want to make sure my title comes through as Chief Wizard.
Yes.
Anyway, so yeah, thanks for that. I guess now we're moving to kind of the closing remarks, and we're gonna wrap. I'm assuming. Edward brought up a couple concepts, or at least one concept I want to clarify. He was talking about predatory home loans. That was the subprime market. So if you want to look at that particular event, it was subprime. They weren't so much predatory loans; that were loans that were given to people that could not pay them back. Very different than what Donald was talking about, which was usury, where you're charging excessive interest beyond what is reasonable for a particular loan. And a lot of those paycheck companies, at least here in the States, have gone out of business over the years. And a lot of the people that ran them are in prison right now. I was involved with one of those folks myself years ago who had been put in prison, came back out and created one of the biggest frauds in Belize. And sadly, I was one of the investors. Fortunately, I got my money back. He also brought up the concept of trust. And this is really what I want to end on is trust. If you're building a banking institution, your predominant asset is trust. If people don't trust you, you will not be successful. You have to be trustworthy. That bring up, and it's actually in context to the Belize story that I had, because there was a Bank of Belize that backed the Sanctuary Belize, which was the effort that I was involved in as an investor. And they recently went under as a result of the Federal Trade Commission in the United States taking Sanctuary Belize to court. And in fact, if you want to read some background on it, I wrote an article called Tarnished Dreams a while back where I talk about it falling apart, which is when Sanctuary Belize and I went sideways because I realized it was a scam, and immediately published on the fact it was a scam. So they paid me my money back to shut me up, but it still didn't end well for them. So in the end, it's trust. If you've got a banking institution, people have to trust you. You have to do what you say. It can't be a case where suddenly the people that are leading the bank are leading very luxurious lives and appearing to spend the money that they should be investing. That can all end really badly for a banking institution. And governments, regardless of the government, tend to take a very dim view of banking institutions that take advantage of their customers, because those customers are also voters. And internet banks tend to be banks at scale, which means if they're coming after you, they're going to make a major effort to make sure that you never get back into banking again. So just remember, it's trust. It's your biggest asset. It's the one you have to preserve. If you don't preserve it, it really doesn't matter which services you have. You won't have a company.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Professor Donald.
That's an interesting list. It looks like my Facebook friends list. You've got professional bluegrass musicians there. Quite an eclectic group. That'll be great. Like if we want to do consulting on bluegrass, I know they love it in Japan, so we could do well. In any event, I do want to say one thing is that I want to ask you a question, Sharif. Does Siri work? Can you use Siri?
Yes.
Okay. Can you use Google Voice?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. I know tons of people with accents. Some of them I don't even think are very big accents who can't use those things. And I also want to point out that, they're kind of a long way from natural language, because if you use embedded relative clauses like the man Sally saw, things like that, they barf on it. Because what they're doing is they're looking at the statistical probability that the next word will be what it'll be. It's not how humans work. And the other day I was trying to get to somebody, and basically the chat bot was basically an index into the FAQs, the frequently asked questions. So no matter what I did, it would pop back with an answer I already knew. I wouldn't have been trying to contact them if it was something I could have read in the FAQs. So I was going crazy. I was about to cancel my service because it was just not, I've canceled service because of things like that where I can't get through to a person. This was Comcast, incidentally. So in any event, I think, we can see it. It's happening right now, and it's been a trend in all aspects of the internet. Is one of the things that's been happening is called disintermediation, which means that we're able to get the intermediaries out of the picture. So PayPal, for instance, if I send money through PayPal, it's not going through a bank. They put it into a PayPal account, and then that person transfers it to their account. And now there's one called Zelle, which a number of the banks have subscribed to, where I can just put money in somebody's account instantly. So there's a lot of the middle people are being cut out. But again, as Rob pointed out, there's the whole trust thing, which is if somebody doesn't do that, if somebody on the other end is somewhere in the middle is dishonest, or just flaky. I mean, software flakes out all the time. You're always in danger of losing things. And that's why kind of the escrow system developed in banks, is because they could check to make sure the money was really there before they transferred it to somebody else, and they could make 100% sure that transfer was going to go through. Back to the voice recognition, there are plenty of people with accents that they can't recognize, and that's a fun thing to get into. I mean, trying to understand the cognitive processes that we use to understand and generate languages in its infancy, and it's a pretty interesting thing to do. So that's if you're looking at something that you want to work on, besides the obvious things about the apps and the servers and this back-end system that allows that to work, all of the front-end stuff needs a lot of help right now too. So it's a pretty exciting field, but it's developing rapidly. I mean, I haven't been in a bank in probably 10 years. I don't even know if there's a physical branch of my bank in my town. I don't even know. They used to have them, but I don't know. So, and it's definitely happening. So thank you. I always love being on this show, Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Donald. Professor David Smith.
Love the concept of most of your topics, where digitalization is a transforming agent to most of your topics. And that digitalization has created many more opportunities. Internet banking, particularly the services to international banking, is an area where entrepreneurship still has a lot of growth potential. The things we can do on the internet that are classified around internet banking is growing still like wildfire. There was a company that one of my friends here in Austin started called Honest Dollar, that was an internet bank looking at how to deal with entrepreneurs and with retirement plans and other things like that. Was acquired by Morgan Stanley at a obscene amount of money for what they really had in there, based on the number of users at the time. That opportunity around servicing the internet financial banking world is still there. As Rob said, as Don and others have said, the bar is still pretty high because it is built on trust. It's built on your ability to be a trusted party with the different things. And intermediation is tough in internet banking today because of that trust factor. The other thing I begin to see is a lot of the work around how the banking industry really has adopted and changed to this. And so I kind of want to just kind of close with, what has the internet banking benefited from, and what has been hurt on that side there. And I'm sorry, I can't do this without talking about the impact of COVID a little bit. Prior to, if I look at the end of 2019, the sharing economy was one of the really hot topics there. And the sharing economy with COVID has really gone down some because there is a less trust today in part of the sharing economy as you begin to look there and as we do things. The global movement of people and goods dramatically impacted by COVID, and finance follows the movement of people and goods. And so that has actually made it easier for internet banks in many instances to assume more of an identity of a traditional brick and mortar bank too. And we're seeing that very much so. So let's look on the other side. What has internet banking really benefited from? It's benefited on the focus on cost reduction. Just like brick and mortar banks have cut back lobbies, they've closed branches and stuff. Internet banking has really pushed this focus on cost reduction even more. One of the other real interesting things that happened during COVID is we had the emergence of what's called a pop-up ecosystem, where you're doing more and more creative partnerships because the value chain has been disrupted so much. Internet banking and internet finance have really helped dramatically with the emergence of these pop-up ecosystems. You know, corporate responsibilities in there, and corporate responsibility is not only did they have to change the way they're doing things, they had to change their own table stakes for consumers. And they therefore asked the purpose of banks to change part of their table stakes too. And that large value of money that the corporations move through the financial system, both traditional banks and internet banks, is one of the big drivers there. You've seen the focus on safety and security. You've seen the virtualization of the workforce. All of these are the things that have pushed the acceptance of our digital experience, which that digital experience has pushed the acceptance of internet banking. And Rob mentioned cryptocurrency as part of it. Yes, cryptocurrency is an expansion of it, but even the concept of cryptocurrency and its push into the regulatory environments of nations has actually accelerated the growth of internet banking, because many regulators see internet banking as the lesser of two evils, with pure cryptocurrency banking and commerce being the greater evil and internet banking being the lesser evil, and are more accepting of it. So if I look across the whole ecosystem, it's driven by a lot of these changes. And last comment here, I love Donald's comment about being up in Arkansas, because I was just there with that same company a few weeks ago. And it's not only an IT heaven, it's a marketing heaven as well too, when you look at talent. But what it illustrates real interesting is you can be one of the largest companies in the world and live in a place that is not a tech center, live in a place that's not an academic center, by understanding that the concept of location has changed. And internet banking is accelerating the concept that location is not the physical point on the map. Location is the point where you best meet the needs and your careabouts of what you're trying to do. And I can be an internet customer, I can be an internet bank of almost anywhere in the world and still serve a global audience and a diverse group of people. So Sri, that to me is part of it here. And those are some good changes and bad changes as well. So thank you again so much. And thank you for the advisor part.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, if you allow me, I just want to declare the all of the board of advisors name. Uh, like we try to make it more perfect, but if you have any advice, we are ready. We are open. We are open for learning, and we will take your advice. Professor Edward, uh, uh, Professor David Smith, Professor David Wood, Professor Rob, Mr. James Eid, Professor Donald, Professor Ainul Jaria, Professor Viva, Professor Talib Rifai, Mr. Tom Rose, Mr. Ganedi, Mr. David Kelly, David Schumacher, Mr. Iftekhar Pathan, Durga Das, Nick Palveda, Kimberly, Mr. Homestoner, Fred Philip, James Eid, Mr. Paul and Madam Paula for she's a famous entrepreneur. Beside that, we want to add two more speakers. One from International Islamic University, Professor Noor Farida. She will join next Saturday. One of the best Islamic scholars from Malaysia, as well as Dr. Eric Dew. And as an ambassador, Mohammad Shohel Rana, he is continuously support World Talent Economy Forum. Humaira Tanzila, backend, they are doing work. And I'm always ready to serve for you and all of our speakers. But as I'm representing developing nations, I know there are many problems. Always, I love to engage with technology based discussion, but basically we do not have resource related problem. We have enough resources and other things. Only we can fix two things: number one, better educations, and number two, transparency. Like we have to reduce corruption. So these are two things. If we can fix, I believe we do not have any problem. We do not have to go for health funding, these that. It's not a problem. Only problem, we need better education system, because we need to develop the education system properly. That's why our board of advisors, they can help millions of people. We already start our courses and degrees. So if you have any kind of offer for our developing nations, we can start these things. And beside that, consulting, because we need to develop our institutions, and we need a lot of technological involvement. I believe, and I saw when I grow corporation like Cambrian Education Group, United Group, from the day one, I engage with different kind of technology. Technology give us more transparency. Technology reduce corruption. Technology reduce lot of cultural problem. So I believe the more we understand technology, the more we utilize, especially developing nations, they utilize their different kind of technology. Let's say internet banking. Developing nations, there are many problems, like country like Bangladesh, billion of dollars hacking from banking systems. So we can reduce it. We can, if we can uh, uh, introduce some transparency and other things. And most important thing is knowledge. So these are the speakers, these are our board of advisor. They can help us, and I know from the global community, they are the best from their field. So thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald, and Professor Rob, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Hopefully we will make more practical projects, and we will do more practical things, and we will change our community with the collaborations of developing and developed nations. Bye bye, and take care.